Welcome to my video. Hello.
Hello, thought leaders. My name is Autumn Rain, and today we're reviewing The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Charles Duhigg reviewed over 1,000 studies and interviewed 300 scientists and executives, all to give you this book. In this video, I'm covering two things: how habits work and how to change a habit. But before I answer those questions, you need to answer a question for me. What changed Lisa? Lisa is an inspiration. She completely changed her life. It all started when her husband walked through the door and said, "Hey, I'm leaving you for another woman." Lisa hit a new low at that point. So she did the only thing she could do. She got drunk and then she showed up on the doorstep of the husband and the mistress and said, "I will burn this condo to the ground." But then, instead of doing that, she went to Egypt to find herself. And that's when she said, "You know what? I can do it. I can change my life." And she did. But she knew she needed a goal, something to work towards. So she said, "I'm going to hike a desert in Egypt, and I'm going to do it in a year." And over the next 6 months, she replaced smoking with jogging. She started running half marathons and then full marathons. And just by changing that, she also changed the way she ate, the way she scheduled, the way she saved money. She changed her entire life. She went back to school. She got her job. She got a new man. She got engaged. And she hiked the desert. Yes, within 8 months, she met her year timeline. So, what changed Lisa? Was it A, willpower, B, desperation, C, belief, D, all of the above, or E, other? It's E, other, because I'm tricky. Yes, Lisa used her willpower. Yes, Lisa was desperate. And yes, Lisa believed in herself. But more than that, Lisa focused on just changing one habit, her keystone habit. A keystone habit has the power to cause a chain reaction. If you change a keystone habit, things will just start falling into place. Lisa's keystone habit was smoking. She had this idea that if she could just give up smoking, she could accomplish her goal. And she was right. It was a habit that supported all of her other bad habits. So when she removed it, her other bad habits got weaker. And so, by attacking smoking, her keystone habit, she was able to make a change that affected every part of her life. In general, identifying keystone habits is really tricky. Exercise is often a keystone habit. When somebody starts implementing exercise into their daily routine, they often get other good habits and it becomes easier. Food journaling is another example of a keystone habit. Writing down what you eat every day will generally help you eat less and eat better. And it'll also help you implement other good habits too. Here's an example of how a keystone habit can change everything. At Alcoa, a factory that processes molten aluminum, their keystone habit is worker safety. Now that may seem surprising, but not really, because it turns out that making it safer to work with molten aluminum than it is to work at your average desk job takes superb communication between departments, which means higher efficiency. It also takes higher quality equipment, which means higher quality product. And it takes better training, which means better workers. Essentially, improving worker safety means improving everything. And if it feels like your life is teeming with bad habits, chances are that there is one habit in particular that if you could change, would change everything. This is the habit loop. I promised I would show you how habits work, and here it is. Any and every habit follows this simple pattern. First, there's a cue, something that triggers your habit. It can be a time, place, emotion, person, or preceding event. And after the cue comes the routine, aka your habit. Finally, there's the reward. Whether you know it or not, there's something you're getting out of every habit you have. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. When thinking about habits, most people just focus on the routine. But the key to understanding habit transformation is understanding the habit loop in its entirety. Our life is just one big jumble of habits. More than 40% of the decisions people make each day aren't actually decisions, but just habits, which means 40% of our life is on autopilot. Now let's talk about a habit that I'm pretty sure everybody watching this video has: checking your phone. When your phone dings, that's a cue. Checking your phone is the routine, and the reward is that shot of dopamine. However, a habit isn't really a habit until you start really craving that reward, which is why people will start checking their phone even if the ding hasn't happened yet. People who tend to have the most success changing their habits and building new ones are people who focus on their reward. They crave it, they visualize it. So that person who's dropping all of that weight, maybe in their mind they're imagining how they're gonna look in that bikini when they finally get there. That person who's earning all that money, maybe they're imagining how it's gonna be when they finally have their dream house. They're anticipating the reward. So when you're trying to build a new habit, set your cue, know your routine, and really focus on the reward. Building a habit is great, but what's even better is changing a habit. Habits never really go away. Have you ever gone back into an old habit just like that? That's because habits are never really gone. They're literally encoded into the structures of our brain. Remember, a habit isn't a habit until you're neurologically craving that reward, which is why if your phone does ding, it is so hard not to check it. Instead of trying to get rid of a habit, try to change a habit. And this brings us to the golden rule of habit change. Do not touch the cue and the reward. Only change the routine. It's easier to change a habit if you keep the cue and the reward the same. Why? Because as we've established, you can never truly get rid of a habit. Let me give you an example. Smoking. Let's say that when you feel anxious, that's your cue. You light up a cigarette. That's your routine. And your reward is that you feel less anxious. Now, if you're trying to change that bad habit, don't change the cue and do not change the reward. Only change the routine. So, when you feel anxious, maybe you can meditate instead of smoking, and your reward is still the same. You feel less anxious, and that'll give you the highest odds of success. The golden rule of habit change lets you knock out 2 birds with 1 stone. Let's say you want to build a good habit while simultaneously getting rid of a bad habit. The golden rule of habit change lets you do that. Remember, you have to keep the cue and the reward the same. And now it's time for, you guessed it, our actionable step of the day. Today, we're going to start changing a habit. Step 1. Choose the habit that you want to change. Not multiple, just one. And try to make it a keystone habit. Step 2. Figure out what your reward is. Let's do an example. Charles Duhigg provides the perfect example on how he defeated his cookie obsession. Every day, Charles Duhigg would go to the cafeteria and buy a cookie and then chat with friends. However, he wanted to change his habit because eating a cookie every day was adding a few pounds to his waistline. But he didn't know why he was getting the cookie. In other words, he didn't know his reward. So he had to experiment. Instead of walking to the cafeteria, he walked outside and went back to his desk without eating anything. The next day, he did buy the cookie, but he ate it at his desk. And then the next day, instead of buying a cookie, he bought an apple and chatted with friends in the cafeteria. The next day, instead of an apple, he used coffee. And then in the next day, instead of going to the cafeteria and buying a cookie, he just gossiped with his friends. Was he craving the cookie or a break from work? And if it was the cookie, was he craving it because he was hungry or because he needed energy? If it was because he was hungry, then the apple should have sufficed. But if it was because he needed energy, then the coffee should have sufficed. Or was it that he just needed to socialize? Charles Duhigg had to figure it out, and that's why he experimented. After each reward experimentation, he set a 15-minute timer. And if after the 15 minutes were up, he was still craving the cookie, he knew that he hadn't found his reward yet. By doing this, he found out that the reason he was going to get a cookie was to socialize. If you don't know the reward for the bad habit that you're trying to kick, then you need to experiment. And once you know the reward and you know the routine you're trying to change, then all you need is the cue.
If you don't know your cue, you're going to need to do some research on yourself. What triggers your habit? It's either a time, a location, a preceding event, an emotional state, or another person/people. So if you don't know what triggers your habit, right before engaging in your routine, write down the time, your location, what you're doing, your emotional state, and who you're around. Going back to the cookie example, this is what that would look like. Sitting at my desk at 3:36 p.m. in a bored state with no one around, having just answered an email. Or walking back from the copier at 3:18 p.m. in a happy state, hanging out with Jim and having just made a photocopy. Keep doing this every time you engage in a habit. And after enough time, you'll notice a trend. And then you'll be able to determine your cue.
Now that you have the first 3 steps down and you know your habit loop, all you have to do is plan. When I see this cue, I will do this routine in order to get this reward. Write out how you're going to get over the pain of changing this habit. How are you going to overcome your obstacles? This is how willpower becomes a habit, by choosing an action ahead of time and then following the routine when an obstacle arrives. Pro tip: willpower is a learnable skill. Sometimes it looks like people with a lot of self-control aren't working that that hard. But that's only because they've made willpower a habit. They have willpower without thinking about it. And dozens of studies show that willpower is actually the most important keystone habit you could ever have. Step 6, believe. The biggest determinant of your success will be whether or not you believe you can cope without your habit. Remember, there's nothing you can't do if you get the habits right. It seems ridiculously simple, but once you're aware of how a habit works, once you recognize the cues and rewards, you're halfway to changing it. I recommend this book highly. You have to read it. One of the biggest reasons I recommend it is because it's told in stories. And scientifically, stories are just easier for us humans to understand. And that's how Charles Duhigg intended it. He made it so that reading this book would be an easier journey for you. So do it. Read this book. Who knows? It could change your life. And as always, if you want to read the book but it's just not for you, you can read my blog instead. The link is in the description. Now, if you like this content, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you next week. Was it A, willpower, B, belief? Nope. Okay, turn off the camera. Let's just turn it off. Camera shy.
Camera's still rolling.
I know. Okay, a Keystone Habit. Our second chain reaction. Okay, I got it. Okay.